Okay, so the recording has started. Let us begin. Can you all see my screen? Unfortunately, I didn't realize I'm still not at home. I'm still away on conference. I didn't realize that I didn't carry my USB with the PowerPoint on it, but you can see the screen, and we generally work from the course content book. So we are on Unit 3. Um, Last week I left you with the task of doing the assignments. Any issue with the assignments? Anything that you want clarity on? Anywhere that you are stuck? Or you managed to work in the groups and it was helpful? Anyone?
Prof, I don't know if this is with everyone, but I'm struggling to create a word cloud. If you had any suggestions of where we can create a word cloud,
I have,
that would be helpful.
yeah, I don't really have an app to create a word cloud. So what I used to do was, I think you remember the previous, was it last semester when we did the word cloud as well? We just took the most frequently used words, right? So if you sat as a group and the words that popped out for you um, would be the ones that you would use on the word cloud. So we made a list of it. Or alternatively, we said on the Word document, you could just uh, bold or enlarge the words that were used most frequently. But in terms of a specific app for the word cloud, no, I don't have access to anything and I haven't moved anything but follow what we did last semester where the words that popped out, just put it in bold or, you know, for your own word cloud on MSK, this is MS Word. But in terms of the assignment and the activities shouldn't be that hectic. But in terms of the assignments, because you had two assignments, um, any issues? Seem to be on the right track. Okay. Everyone okay? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay, so we are good. So on Unit 3, and I'm hoping to cover Unit 3 and some of Unit 4 today. And we do have another lecture on Thursday, hoping to wrap up this. This content was fairly long, but let's see how much of it we do cover. A lot of it is self-study because, like I said, the activities, the assignments that you have to do. So, Unit 3 is guiding postgraduate students reading for a research project. So, firstly, let's put ourselves in the shoes of the postgraduate student, right? So, if you are writing up, for example, whether it's your proposal, whether it's your literature review, what steps do you follow? I'm going to give you what I generally tell my students to do, but let's hear from the class. As a student perspective, not as a supervisor, because right now, put yourselves in the shoes of the student, and then we're going to come back as supervisors on what we expect our students and or how we expect our students to read and gather information, especially for literature reviews and so on. Anyone wants to give us how they would tackle it? If even if you're writing a paper, how do you read and gather information? Anyone?
I'm terrible. Good morning.
Morning.
I I the latest thing is I go to ChatGPT
All right.
and I see what I sort of I start with like a spider web, spider map. I look at the ideas that come up, and then I select from there. And invariably, when I look at those things, often I also get other ideas. And then it gives me something to start off with when I'm reading, because
To
I
build
like
like
to
a
sort of,
roadmap.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's kind of what I tell my students to follow. It's what I follow my on my own. Have a bit of a conceptual framework, draw a flow chart, have a roadmap as to the direction you are going. You know, a lot of students with the literature review part of it because it's a lot of information to read, and that is why we're looking at this section in Unit 3 is the reading journals. You have to read a lot of publications, books, etc., just to collect enough information to support an argument to write up your literature review. It's a tedious task. And how do we actually go about now supervising the students and guiding them on how to write literature? So I think I mentioned to you 2 lectures back that the worst part for me is on anything, even if I'm doing a dissertation, helping a student, or even my own publications, my own work, literature review really stumps me. So unless I have a proper framework or some kind of roadmap guiding me on the reading, so we haven't come to the writing yet. It's just all about reading and how much we have to read and collecting that information. So I also um, tell my students that planning is very important. Any phase of the study, any phase of the project, the research project that you are doing, you have to plan yourself. And that map or spiderweb helps a lot. Um, Also, what I teach my students is when they come to the chapter 3, we look at what is called the research onion, and it's much like a roadmap as well, like a framework that you follow. And then you start unpacking, much like an actual onion. You start unpacking each layer, and that's how you start reading, and then eventually start writing down your thoughts and the information that is required because everything that you read is not going to be written. Everyone with me? Because some of the information may not be relevant to your topic or your research. So we are on page 36. For each of the 3 statements below introduces um, one or more of the themes of this unit that we are looking at, which is how to guide your postgraduate students reading for a research project, right? We haven't shown them, or we're not at the point where they're writing. Like I said, it's all about just reading the information that they are collecting. Statement 1, each academic discipline or content area presupposes specific kinds of background knowledge about how to read text in this area, often also requires a particular type of reading. So it's not only how they write, how they interpret, but how they read, gather information. So sometimes when we are reading, we just skim through stuff. When we're actually at a research level, we're supposed to read in detail. So we're looking at a particular type of reading style. How do they read and absorb and collect that information, right? Statement 2, the findings revealed that there was a significant difference in the assessment of how the reading skills of postgraduate students from the perspective of different supervisors and students themselves. Students had perceived that they had a higher moderate level of readiness compared to their supervisors. Supervisors also felt that the students possessed limited readiness in terms of reading skills, such as questioning and evaluating the text. These results have implications for the need for innovative approaches to advance the critical reading skills of postgraduate students. And this comes to what you were saying, Yurika, that you use ChatGPT to actually guide you. So a lot of students, what they're doing these days with the apps, the AI apps that are out there, It makes reading, constructing sentences. There's even apps that write the sentences for you. So everything's constructed, everything is done for you just by using these AI tools. But how much of it is actually, in essence, your voice coming out in that? So that's when we go to Unit 4 and we look at the actual writing up of this information. Anyone wants to add in on the type of reading that is involved when your students are collecting information? So the stages that I take them through is, like I said, a conceptual framework. I'm going to write it on the chat. Let me do a blank. A moment for me. I'm just doing a blank. So before a student actually, can you all see the screen? So
Yes,
before
thank
they
you.
write, they need to read the literature, the relevant, we'll say relevant literature, right? So each of you will have your own style of supervising. So I'm just giving you an idea of what I do to guide my students, right? So I go through this entire project plan with them, right? So I'm going to say we have a project plan. And in that project plan, I would expect them to have at least developed a conceptual framework, providing a roadmap to the study. And what happens here is that they draw a flow chart. And it gives them a nice, like I said, guidance and roadmap to follow for the study, right? So they draw a flow chart. And based on that flow chart, the the variables that they use become the heading, it's a starting point, headings and subheadings of the literature study. So I'm going to give you an example, right? This is how I tell them to map it out. So for example, the topic is, so I'm a quality person. So we're looking at total quality management, which is abbreviated to 2QM on organizational performance. So the outcome of the study is going to be organizational performance, right? And then you have the role of TQM, which is total quality management, right? But total quality management is made up of 7 variables, which is customer satisfaction, leadership, employee involvement. Not gonna write all. Let me just put down 4 and your supply relationship, right? That's 4 factors. So the 7, I chose 4, and all this leads to organizational performance, right? That's your basic conceptual framework. So what I tell them to do is use each of these. So when you are reading, because it's a lot of information, so once you have this framework, then you can now start planning how to read before you even write down your thoughts. So when you are reading, obviously, unpack this for me. What would we read first? What is total quality management, right? Everyone with me? I can't see your hands up because I'm on a different screen. So if you unmute, it's fine. So if we wanted to read, we'll read up more on total quality management, right? Then we look at all these total quality management practices. Firstly, then you read on total quality management, what is relevant for your topic. Then we'll look at total quality management. Um, and the impact it will have on organizational performance, right? I'm using abbreviations. Then you look at, again, each aspect, which is customer satisfaction and organizational performance, what impact it has, leadership. And so already you're building your framework, right? And then from this framework, you start reading. These are the papers I need to look up with these headings, because when you are putting in a search, for the literature that you need to read, this is what you're going to, you have to, it narrows down your search. Can you see that? Because you're already developing your headings and subheadings before you read, and then you know, this is my roadmap. This is now me planning this project. This is the information I need to read. So it starts building your framework. Simple enough? So that's how I would guide students on how to read, because they would now start reading and then collecting the information, sifting out what they need that's relevant for their study for this particular example, like I've highlighted in red. This is the topic, simple topic, basic headings and subheadings, and guides your reading. And then it also guides the writing, right? Because you just type in, if you were to Google right now, go onto Google Scholar and just type in TQM and organizational performance, you will see how much of information is out there, thousands and thousands of studies and papers out there. But we don't need every single one. We need to see which ones we are reading. So that is why we break it up. This is why I, as a supervisor, I would guide my students this way. Okay, I'm opening up the floor. Is there any similar processes that you would use, or you just leave your students to collect information and read at their own pace, guide themselves? I mean, how do you, as a supervisor now, guide your students on just this reading portion, the reading skills?
Prof, I also like to help the students refine their research question and thesis statements, as these will then fine tune the reading a bit more. Then
Yes, so
they
this,
have a bit more of a focus. Yeah.
most definitely, because remember what I'm showing you now, what you have on your screen, right, is that framework is based on your objectives and research questions. Because at the end of the day, you also need to link it, right? So you have to guide them in how they read, how much of information they collect, and then now start putting it into like a format and start writing. Okay. So this is why we say, and everyone has their own way. What the reason why we say different types of reading is because we mentioned about the different learners that we have working at their own pace, how they, way I study would be different from the way you study. The way I write my thesis would be different from the way you write your thesis. And obviously, we have the same supervisor, but we're being guided in the way that we learn and how we put down our thoughts, because each individual is different. And that is why we say that the supervisor has to cater for the needs of the student and the student's learning ability. So looking at statement 3, literature reviews are the quintessential site of identifying your work. And this is why the reading is so important. Where the novice researcher enters what we call an occupied territory, with all the imminent danger and dread that this metaphor implies, including the possible ambushes, barbed wire fences, and unknown academics who patrol the boundaries of already occupied territories. This is where we spoke about your novice researcher comes in with limited knowledge on how to conduct research. And this is where we sit at the honors level, at NQF level 8, before you even enter. And we said that the master's level is your middle position, where you are a little more advanced. And at that postgraduate diploma level or honors level, it's those students need, we spoke about, the students need a lot more guidance and assistance. So it's a lot more work for a supervisor to do because they are first time researchers. And a lot of them coming in do not have that background, right? And we assume as supervisors, okay, they know how to do research. No, they need to be taught how to do research. That is why we have modules such as research methods and so on, methodology and design. And we also spoke about occupied territories as things that literature that's already existing, studies that's already existing, and we adding at this level as a novice researcher or even a master's researcher, you adding to the body of knowledge that's already existing, right? What are you bringing to the table that is of value that adds to the body of knowledge that already exists? And you need to guide that student. And we spoke about, I think last week, we had an example of guiding the student in such a way for your own vested interest as a supervisor, because you want to publish in a certain area, research area, you have a focus area. Student wants to go in a different direction, but you're steering the student into your direction because that's where your research lies. So it puts a lot of pressure onto the student. And as a novice researcher, the student's going to follow what the supervisor is doing because they don't know much. They want to be guided, and they will just assume that you are guiding them in the way that they want to be guided, but it's not always the case because students want to do a specific project and the supervisor wants to go in a different direction. Everyone with me? Thumbs
Prof,
up.
yes.
Yes.
I would just like to, you've got me thinking now with this whole multimodal thing.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, instead of using, like I usually use the little spiderweb thing, I wonder if it'd be possible to do this like in a storyboard format, where you take your research questions and instead of writing the words below each one, you put it in picture format, like just a clip or something to represent, like in a symbolic way. I
Yes.
think for some people that might work because
Yes.
that's often works for me.
Yeah. Because like we said, there's different types of learners, right? And with a visual learner, obviously you would use more of um, diagrams, pictures, tables, just so that they can understand the content instead of just those that are just reading text. It gets also monotonous and boring to just keep reading text. Because if you read journal, Tony, I don't mean this in a bad way, coming from psychology and looking at psychology journals, um, it's a lot of theory and reading. It's not like how my work is, which is testing of hypotheses, and there's a lot of quantitative analysis that goes into it. I've seen some of like medical journals, psychology journals, philosophy. It's a lot of narrative, not a lot of data that goes into it, not a lot of diagrams. So someone that cannot, I wouldn't say cannot read, but it's a lot of reading to actually do. And this is why we're looking at this unit right now, because those students reading that information, sometimes you lose they lose their train of thought because it's too much of narrative that needs to be done or needs to be read. Everyone with me? So there is a section that deals with the visual learner and so on, and how to deal with that. That is why actually I draw out what's on this diagram. This I made them draw this in a flow chart. Right now, I'm not because of time. I didn't, um, draw out. So you map out with the flow chart. Just mapping out all these so that it guides the student, their reading and their writing. Okay, 3.2. What does the reader, postgraduate student as a reader, what do they need to know and be able to do in the context of research? And we spoke about at an honors level, they need a lot of guidance. You also have to look at the do's and don'ts of reading and writing. To identify those you exhibit regularly and work on those that you don't, your good and bad practices or habits. Note that some of the practices in this rather daunting list also involve writing in response to how you read. So obviously you're reading, you collect information, you now have to put your ideas and thoughts into a good argument, solid argument in line with your research questions and objectives. Then you start writing. State your claim and then you start writing, building up from that reading. The writing is now is a response to reading and is important for bringing the reader into conversation with what you are putting down into text. So that is why you have to collect and read a lot of information before you write your thoughts down. While you are reading, think about which of the reading practices you think your students need to work on, what progress they have made towards doing this. If you supervise either at an honors, master's, or doctoral level, you might need to make a distinction between what you expect from your students at these different levels. Because as we said, at those different levels, starting with the honors level, they're novice. Then by master's level, they get a bit more experience. In the doctoral level, it's less guidance, less supervision because they've already mastered how to, what if they mastered, but they already experienced in how to read and how to write up the various sections or various chapters of their projects and dissertations. Think about other practices that may be useful for you. For example, like Tony said, always going back to the research question, unpacking that. Eureka mentioned about using spider web. I mentioned about using this conceptual framework or even the research onion, right? Unpacking each one layer by layer. So we have our different techniques of supervising, but it's what guides the student in their ability. Where are they much stronger? Note that many of the practices listed apply equally to the reading of visual text. Some students find reading visual text, this is what we spoke about, Eureka, just now, having charts and graphs and diagrams, drawings, photos, collages. Some students find that challenging. Other students that are visual learners would actually find that as an advantage for them. Some students like to have more visual representation. Like I said, for myself, being in the type of research that I do, which is quantitative analysis, I do a lot of, like I said, hypothesis and looking at a lot of correlation between variables. Mine will be more quantitative in nature. A lot of charts, a lot of diagrams, pictorial representation of my data. So very visual, as opposed to others that may write in a more narrative way. Effective readers can do the following: identifying problems, gaps, conflicts, etc., that are in the text, but this is where you have to read a lot of information. Analyzing that text and trying to explain how to bridge your gap, right? So it's also how you write out your problem statement, how you write out your objectives and your research questions, and then looking at how do we now find solutions, bridging the gap. posing a good argument for your study, using the context to connect analytical explanations to your bigger picture, which is the outcome of your study, using a language that indicates layers of understanding, so how you write, your style of writing, citing examples, quotes, and events to connect with your analysis. As we mentioned, you state a claim, for example, what is the problem that exists, and then you support it with what literature says. This author concurs with your statement. Place information in order to explain the text process chronologically. So when you are writing, you using references to support what you are saying because it's your voice that's coming out. You are using references. You cannot use 2024 and then 2020 because the author in 2020 said it first, supported you first, and then it was concurred by the author in 2020, another author in 2024. So it has to go in chronological order. You can't be all over the place and have 2024 and then 2018 and then 2020. No. When you're doing the referencing and supporting your literature, it must always be in chronological order. Compare and contrast examples to make defensible judgments. Yes, and you can also tabulate that, but always, like I said, the argument that you are making, use other cases to support your argument. So compare it against other examples. Experiment with ideas, raise questions, make good judgments, synthesize your information. Remember, you're building a story here. Challenge the ideas of other authors that are doing the same work. So you may find a gap. So maybe the work was done in 2020. You use them as a reference, but you can say, this can be done in future. Do a recommendation. Because from 2020 to 2024, that author's work that you're using can still improve. And it can also form a baseline for you to use in your study to help that author also improve their work. It's adding to the body of knowledge that exists, improving on the body of knowledge that exists. These are the gaps that are there. Contrast the accuracy of the information that you have and recognize points of views and perspectives. Like you said, you are posing the argument and you are supporting it by what other authors have brought to the table. So in order for you to be an effective reader of academic texts and for your students to be effective readers, they need to be able to play multiple interrelated roles, some of which they may find more challenging than others. Some of the key roles are put in the form of two tables below. 4 roles of a leader. I am on page 37 right now. I'm going to change screen. This is what we're looking at, right? The 4 roles of readers. You also have a publication, the multimodal, looking at being visual and using multimodal text to write out your read your information and write out your information. Eureka, this will explain a lot more of what you just asked as well, right? So you can just click on that test. It's available. The link, the publication is available to you. Additional reading I will upload onto Moodle as I've done before. So the first one would be reader as code breakers or text decoders. How do I crack this? What verbal and visual signs do I look at? So if you like I said, you build a conceptual framework and you work from that. So you're already starting to break down the information into those sections. So it's easier for you to collect information. It narrows down the scope of the amount of information that you are reading. The reader as a text participant, what does the text mean and what story does it convey? So if you are reading, you must also be able to understand now my role as a reader Am I understanding what the text means? Does the text relate to my subject, which is the topic that or the study under investigation? And what message is it trying to convey? So is it supporting the argument that you are making? The reader as a user, what kind of text is this? How do I use it and what might I not um, choose to use it for? Okay, so it's the type of media that you're using or the type of articles that you're reading, whether it is in a conference proceeding, whether it's in a journal, it's a book chapter, or it can even be a book, right? You are also allowed to read on websites, blogs, anything that's at your disposal, newspapers, magazines, information that would be relevant to your study. A lot of us and my students do the same. I'm sure you would have experienced it with your students as well. They only go on to the UJ database or their specific academic institution library database or Google Scholar, and it ends there because you only read conference papers and journals, but nothing is stopping you from using newspaper articles, magazine articles, blogs, websites. There's current information there as well. And we use Harvard referencing style, and it shows you how to reference even a blog and a website. And it gives you a lot more current information than written literature, such as your journals, your books, and so on. Okay, and then the last one is as an analyst, what version or reality does this text present? How does this text attempt to do this to me, do this for me? And how does it attempt to position me? So how is the text going to help you? And this is where Tony, your statement comes in that it has to link to your research objectives. It has to link to your research questions because at the end of the day, that's what you want to achieve. You want to achieve those objectives and you want to ensure that the research questions are answered. Up until this point, any questions before we move on to the multimodal text? Anyone? Okay, I see that we are good, so let's move on. Thank you. So the second table that is in front of you, four roles of the reader and designers of multimodal text, right? Different modes where we spoke about multimodal previously. This presents information across a variety of modes, which is visual, images, design elements, written language, narrative. Such texts can be challenging for some novice readers because they may be governed by a logic that differs from that of the written text. The written text meaning is derived from the position in a temporal sequence. In the multimodal text, it means it is derived from the grammar of visual design, in which colors, perspectives, framing, and composition of all this plays an important role when you are a reader. That is why I try to make it more visual for my students. Like I said, the document that I was writing up in front of you, where we put it into a more conceptual framework, flow chart, like Eureka said, they were using the spider web, and it helped. They draw that roadmap, it actually helped. Okay, then we have still using multimodal styles, the researcher as a navigator. Navigation includes movement through both cognitive and virtual space, with the reader's reading part determined by his or her transaction with the spatial composition of the text. So how do you navigate yourself through this reading of all this information? Like I said, for me, to guide the students, they must have a project plan. Navigating yourself through the multimodal text must take note of what has been rendered by the reader, the author, illustrator, publisher, etc., and must attend to the grammars and visual design in addition to how you write out that text. Typography, the use, structures used, even the type of language that you are using. We said there's a specific style in which to write in the different disciplines and how you teach your students to write their thoughts down. Being an interpreter, how do you interpret all the information and analyze the information that you have read? As a designer, planning out the text that you have. The reader, as a designer, not only navigates what is being read, but also constructs or draws or designs a reading path through a multimodal text, which is what we were doing just now. The reader, as an interrogator, this is where you put forward your argument because you've read all the information that you've wanted, so you now can write and build that argument in line with your research questions and objectives. As postgraduate students conducting research, it is likely to be, they are likely to be competent in some of these aspects that were given in those tables, but not all of them are effective reading practices. To be more confident and skilled in playing some role as a reader. One of the challenges of being a supervisor is to decide whether the student, which practices and roles need strengthening, and how to go about doing this, understanding the possible difficulties associated with reading academic texts. Because when you are reading any of these academic papers, publications, it's not easy to evaluate. Sometimes you have to read it more than once in order for you to actually understand what the text is saying, and is it relevant to your study, and can I now use it in my literatures? That is why you have to dissect everything that you are reading. Which takes us to activity 3.1. And also at the end of the session, whatever time we finish off the session, I'm going to need you to work in your groups again, assist each other. I will be online if you need me. So all you have to do is just send me a message that I'm having difficulties anyway, and I'll be online on my phone, right? So let's look at activity 3.1. Before we do that, everyone clear? Any questions? Any comment? Anything you need clarity on? Thumbs up if you good. All right, thank you guys. Let's look at 3.1. So, write a paragraph in which you reflect on the roles you expect your postgraduate students to perform. You might want to use the questions below to stimulate your thinking. Number one is, what do you require your postgraduate students to do when they are performing the role of text participant? Text participant is just reading information, right? And we're going to unpack this. Is the role of the text user relevant to the reading required in your specific discipline? What do you require your postgraduate student in your discipline to do when they are performing the role of a text analyst? So unpack text participant, user, analyst, and then the role of the reader as of multimodal text, if any. Are the postgraduate research students in your discipline likely to find challenging, and why? Anyone wants to add anything to that? Their comments? Let's take it as you are doing this qualification because you want to be effective, efficient, and good supervisors to your students. This is why you are undertaking this qualification, right? Um, Myself as a supervisor, I seek a lot of guidance from other supervisors that are more experienced, other professors that are more experienced there and more senior to me. Right? I get a lot of guidance from them. But you now, we were speaking student perspective, you as a supervisor, given all this information that we just went through about your student as a reader, remember we didn't come to the writing skills yet. So your student as a reader, how would you now guide them? Aside from using the spider web and so on, how would you now, going forward after this session, guide your students? Look at the different levels: novice, middle, and experienced. Anyone? Because this is the discussion you're going to have in your group today when you are tackling these assignments and activities. So unpack it a bit now. Discussing. Anyone? How would you guide your students? As the potential supervisor or current supervisor right now, what do you do with your students? Masatuka and then Tony.
Prof, I think for the novice at honors level, so more as text participants, they tend to just refer to one source and not necessarily corroborate it with listing multiple sources to kind of build on to their idea. Whereas at master's level and at PhD level, the expectation is for them to be, as text participants, to kind of engage with more authors kind of saying the same thing to build onto their idea. So multi-referencing in the same idea as opposed to just referencing one author.
One author, yes. And that's I'm glad you touched on that, because that's also what I guide my students on, right? So for example, they state a claim, right, which is your voice as a writer. Um, and then you support it with literature, what we always mention. A lot of the times they think that supporting it by one literature is sufficient, by one or reference is sufficient. But if you support it by multiple references, then it builds a better argument to say that, you know what, these 2 or 3 authors are supporting my claim. And it makes my research a bit more solid, more relevant, adding value, because it's adding to that body of knowledge that already exists, because 3 authors have already said similar things. I'm going in the same direction, which means I'm also adding to that, contributing to that, right? Um, and yeah, I think that reading is very important in that, to get multiple points of view from different references, different authors, instead of just one author supporting a claim I made. So thank you for that, Tony.
A very, very novice skill is teaching students about library skills. Basically, that at the library you have various databases and how to sift through them, and not just refer to Google or Google Scholar, but that there are much more credible and more professional databases that are available to students. And then similarly to the comment just before, is at maybe a master's level, where students are now expected to write up formal proposals, then you teach them how to read critically. So this means not just reading to report back, but because it's a literature review that's expected of them, they need to be able to evaluate some of the readings and see whether or not they feed back into the actual research, and they're not just additional readings for the sake of adding. So that critical reading aspect becomes more and more of a thing as they move from masters to PhD.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. That is why we have the resources in place. But then also, as much as, and I found this as a challenge with some of my students at master's and doctoral level, and You think that, they've left that novice research stage. You're a bit more experienced, but the funny thing is, as much as you take a horse to the water, you can't make them drink it, right? And I've had this challenge where we give the students the resources. Here's what you read, and unpacking that information. And because I'm in this field where quality, and I've read so much of literature, and that if a student tells me what topic they're doing, I'll automatically tell them, go to this author, go to this database, or to this specific journal, because I already know what exists because I've read so much, and they don't do that. The reading is so important, and it's much like when they come for a lecture, I expect them to have read in advance, because that is why we upload information on Moodle and stuff like that. So pre-prepare yourself, especially at those levels. And, so you have some kind of understanding and background. Like you said, giving them the library database is very important, teaching them how to read, teaching them how to gather information, what sources to use, is also really critical when it comes to the reading aspect of it, right? Anyone else wants to add before we move on? Okay, so I'm sure we can move on. So let us move on. We'll do a break at 10:30. Sorry, the weather is really bad here and it's been affecting my throat. 3.3, possible difficulties for students in reading academic texts, right? And this is something we just spoke about right now, where I also have an issue with how students read information. Funny enough, sentence construction, reading, and stuff like that is a problem. Also, we spoke about English not being a first language, and a lot of the stuff that's on the databases is in English. And having to read that text that's in English when you have difficulty with English, right? So the text relationships, by contrast with simpler, popular media, everyday text, relationships among ideas in complex text may be implicit, something subtle, more involved and deeply embedded in the message rather than just overtly presented. Readers need to be able to make inferences to construct meanings that are not directly stated, and to be willing to engage with perspectives that are significantly unlike or even in opposition to their own. So you have to look at different perspectives. So you are reading a lot of information, right? So you have to sift out the information or the ideas that are related to your topic. But then we also have contrasting ideas where you have authors that will say the opposite to what you are saying, to your own views. But it doesn't mean that it's irrelevant and you shouldn't use that information. The contrast is good because we need to know we are comparing our study and what is lacking in, firstly, the author's study, and what is lacking and what is the gaps in your study. And then that is where you make your conclusions or your recommendations and improvements from. So it's drawing that relationship, having that contrast, that comparison with what other texts are saying. Richness of detail. Because the complex texts are likely to be rich in detail, readers need to be able to separate supportive detail from main ideas. In many contemporary texts, both ideas and supportive detail are provided not only in words but in multiple visual forms, or in graphical representation. We'll suggest that such multimodal tests require readers to move back and forth from prose language to sometimes elaborate visual displays, which may be examined and then synthesized in an overall understanding. It's how they um, are reading and also visually represent the information that they have, because essentially you're going to analyze this information. Intertextual references. This is your in-text referencing, where you have to state an author, like we said, manually connecting the reference to the work that you are referring to, writing up the text and then attaching a reference to it. And we said having more than one author supports an argument. Hold on for me for one moment, please. Sorry about that. Also, the text structure. Academic texts can be structured in various ways, depending on the field of study and the discipline that you have. Your supervisors and all of us sitting here are from different backgrounds, with different disciplines, and therefore the way we guide our students and the formatting and structures that we use, much like I just showed you now, I go towards a conceptual framework. That is how I tell my students to build a roadmap. However, in your discipline, you may develop your own structure, your own template of how the student should be presenting their work or representing their work. So that's the text structure. Then the actual writing style. How does the student write? The type of language they use, the punctuation, the type of words that they use. As I mentioned previously, a lot of the time, and with the novice research and sometimes with the master's researchers as well, what they tend to do is the way we speak, right? They write exactly like how we speak. And when it comes to the research aspect, it's more of a scientific and technical writing approach that we take, a writing style that we take. So we're not writing like how we speak. So your argument needs to come across in such a way and reflected in your writing in a more scientific and technical manner. Vocabulary density. Readers of the academic text can expect to encounter both unfamiliar words and familiar words. And this is where, when you have, whether it's familiar or unfamiliar, you need to write down words that you don't know, right? And this is how you end up with your dissertations and your theses and minor dissertations and research reports. List of terms or list of glossary, right? It's words that you are not familiar with, or you are but familiar with, but you need to put information in there because you feel that the person that's going to read your work or read your publication may not really know certain words. We don't know every single word. We may be researchers, we may be sitting as professors, doctors, whatever the case is. You don't know all the words that are out there. So a lot of the times I have conversations with people, and I'm not afraid to say that I actually have to go look up some of the words sometimes, the words that they are using. And, um, that's how you build your vocabulary. So the type of words that you use as well in the text that you are writing. The author purpose. While the author purpose sometimes can be stated, this is not always the case, leaving readers to determine why the author is telling the reader something. So that's more mainly your purpose statement. Giving them, that is why we build that introduction and background. That's why we give a problem statement, objective of the study, significance, scope of the study. These are general guidelines that we use for our research. So the person that is reading can understand what this student or this researcher has written. Okay, everyone with me? Very quiet today. Any questions up until this point, and then we move on to activity 3.2.
Still with you, Prof.
All good, Prof.
All good, all understood. Okay, so let's just see before we go to activity 3.2. You either as a student or a supervisor, what is your reading style? How do you navigate yourself when you are guiding your students or writing for yourself, doing your own research? Do you use that kind of style that you use for yourself to guide your students?
Yes, Prof. I'd like to say I use a similar style. The only thing I add is that I include skim reading of topics, which I mean, I do suggest to students, but I feel like they stop with the skim reading if you tell them how to skim read. Um, but there's that aspect of being able to read quickly and abstract and understand what the rest of the journal article is about, and then go to the parts that you're looking for particularly,
Does
as a
skim
form of
reading,
skim
let me
reading.
ask, does the skim reading actually help? Because you tend to miss relevant information. Sometimes you can just miss relevant information that is needed. And then you have to
Yeah,
go back. So I found that I tried to do that, right? The reason why I'm asking, I'm on a personal note, I'm asking, and this can be a learning experience for everybody. I've tried that. Some students have tried it. Like we said, we all have different learning abilities. How we read, how we write, how we interpret, and so on, how we evaluate. For myself, I even tried it because there's so much that you have to read, and then you're like, no, let's just skim through, make a few notes here and there, and then pertinent information gets missed. And then, you save this information and then you have to go back to those articles. But that's one of the things I experienced. Okay. I feel I have to read in detail, else I'm going to, sometimes I do lose focus, especially doing research. You get lost sometimes in the trend and then you lose focus. um yeah, so how have your students dealt with that, and the rest of you, have you also experienced that?
yeah, Prof. This is why I say with the students, I don't usually suggest that, primarily because it can be an impediment or it can be a way to do things quickly but ineffectively. So the only reason I skim read is when I'm trying to build a topic similarly to what Eureka was talking about with ChatGPT, but before we had ChatGPT, that was how you'd get a quick idea or a quick piece of inspiration,
Yes.
or something that would then push you to reading further. But essentially, skim reading is ineffective if you're trying to read once. It's good for idea building or for
Yes.
mapping out
Mapping
a
out,
new
yes.
project. Yeah.
No, definitely, most definitely. I've also learned about that because for me, I'm always learning different styles, different techniques, and so on. So yeah, we build on those skills that we have. Anyone cares to weigh in, and then we can move on to exercise or activity 3.2.
I also teach something very bad. I think I always say to students at first, if you are still sort of searching for appropriate literature, instead of killing yourself in the process, just read chapter 1. And from there, you decide, because that will give you a very good indication of whether it's aligned to what you're looking for or not.
And does that work?
In most respects, it does. I mean, if I say chapter 1, I mean, the beginning section, the
Yes,
introduction and background. Of course, the abstract first. And because that
which
is how I
already
see it.
builds the story. Yes, the aspect builds the
Because
story.
sometimes you find this topic that is totally aligned with what you're looking for, but when you start reading, you realize, no, this is not the way, not exactly what you had in mind.
Yeah,
So
it's
instead
similar,
of
but the
wasting
trend is,
time,
yeah.
so just go to the abstract, and then if it's a book or so, just read the first chapter to see if it's really what you're looking for, if it's in the same vein.
I mean, you
It
know what?
works for
It's a
me.
practice. Yes, it's a practice. Like I said, we all got different techniques. We can all learn from these different. I've used all these various techniques. Exactly what you say. Even for my own research, also with guiding my students. See, you get a snapshot by reading the abstract. It'll give you an idea as to whether the information is going to be relevant for your study or is linked to your study. There's no point in just going through and reading the entire article only to find out, you know what, the topic may be the same, but information that I want is not there, and then you had wasted that time reading the entire document. We got to find ways. It's like I said, there's enough literature that's out there, and we have to find efficient ways of actually collecting data or collecting this information for your literature review. All right, so looking at activity 3.2, let's unpack this. Choose a short journal article or book chapter or an extract from a longer article or chapter that you would advise one of your postgraduate students to read. Write a paragraph in which you identify one feature of complex text as outlined above. Explain why your postgraduate students might find it difficult and reflect on what you could do to assist them to address this difficulty. So this is the reading of text. So what you need to do is, in your various disciplines for activity 3.2, look at a journal article. It can even be a book chapter, or looking at maybe a longer article, whatever the case may be. Read it, dissect it, how you would advise your postgraduate students to read this. Then your reflection would be to write a paragraph in which you identify something that's complex in that text and explain why your postgraduate student might find it difficult and reflect on how you could assist them. So if you found it as a complex text that you were reading, which means that your postgraduate student is going to experience the same difficulty. They're going to find it complex. Then how you would advise them and assist them to address this difficulty. Think you can handle that? Thumbs up, thumbs down. All right, moving on. We'll take a short break at after 10. What additional difficulties might the postgraduate student encounter if reading is an additional language? Given that academic language is no one's mother tongue, most students are likely to need support for the development of their academic reading literacy. As I mentioned before, the style in which those journals and books are written is not easy to understand, especially as a novice researcher. Coming into the system for the first time, doing research for the first time, it's not something that is easy for them to understand. Adding to that, English is not their first language. And a lot of the literature that is out there and the text that is out there is in English, because we are an English medium university. Most of the universities in South Africa are English medium. We teach in English, we read, we write, evaluate, do everything in English. But then what happens to the learner whose first language is not English? How do they interpret? How do they read and analyze information from the texts that are given to them, right? The following are some of the challenges that are identified and listed by a few researchers that they found over the years. Students' lack of and limited knowledge of specialist or discourse-specific vocabulary and patterns. As I mentioned, there's a lot of words that we don't know. And as we read academic writing, scientific writing, technical writing, you're going to come across a lot of vocabulary that is not familiar to you. So obviously a person that is limited in their English or reading skills, those vocabularies are going to make it a bit difficult. So I generally tell the students when I'm guiding them or supervising them, the words that are difficult or the words that are not familiar to them, always make a list of it. Make a list of it with the meaning so that they can learn what it really is. And then essentially it becomes that list of terms or definitions and glossary that you put into your final dissertation. The volume of reading that is required, and we mentioned this, there is a lot that needs to be read. Given that the students are likely to read more slowly in an additional language and lack of time to complete this reading, how do we handle that difficulty? Students' unfamiliarity with critical reading and thinking skills, right? Because they don't have those skills. It's taught to them. especially those novice researchers coming into the system for the first time. Students' underestimation of their capabilities resulting in unnecessary anxiety and lack of confidence because we don't know at this stage. When you were a first time researcher, how did you feel when you were doing your honors? Anyone? Doing research for the first time, how did you feel?
Bewildered. I didn't understand half the words.
Yes.
But I've sort of done something now that what I've been doing since then. As you've said, I write down these words and I stick them all over my home office over the wall because I can see, semiotic, what. I get all these things from them because I forget some of them. So I've got the word and its meaning next to it. And another thing that I did the other day was I had to read an article and I just read it, and I just couldn't make much sense. It was just far beyond me. So I put it into Chat GPT and asked them to put it into a local language, which they did. And it was much easier to read. And I thought maybe that's a way for our students to go, especially the ones who battle with language.
Yes.
The only bad thing is then that they will not develop a good academic vocabulary.
Because they're being guided by all these tools.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is.
But it really helped. The
Yeah.
colloquial language you put it into, it was just actually very simple. But
No,
I
it is
could
very
then
simple. I
understand.
think that's the reason why this day and age the tools are available. And we did speak about what does where does your institution stand on using these tools? Because at one stage, UJ didn't want us to use the AI tools, right? Your various institutions may have a different standpoint on them. And also the Turnitin submissions, you would see previously it had something that would detect AI and it tells you the percentage of AI tools that you've used and where you've used it. Um, it was in blue, and the Turnitin shows red. The percentage for Turnitin is red, and then the AI tools is in blue. I see recently it was there before. I used it for my students when they were submitting assignments because students would put an entire assignment in ChatGPT and Copilot and stuff like that, and then send me an assignment. And then the Turnitin picks it up, the AI tool. I see recently when I went on to Turnitin, they've removed the percentage for AI tools. It's no longer there. So I don't know still don't know what the standpoint is, but what we generally say is students can use these tools, whether it is the ChatGPT, your Copilot, your Quillbot, any other paraphrasing tool as well. But teach them how to use it ethically. That is a term that always came up when we had workshops and stuff. And I even tell this to my students, and it's like that sentence or that phrase, teach your students to use it ethically. You can teach them, guide them how to use these tools. I mean, it's very efficient, it's very helpful. I myself use it for my research papers and stuff. Use it ethically. You can't just copy and paste everything from the Copilot, for example, and just go and put it in your assignment. That is unethical. You still have to dissect the information, but use it as a guideline and paraphrase. Um, but yeah, that's what we were told. We still don't know at UJ where we stand on these tools. So we're teaching our students to use it, but we don't know how far we can go because at some point we were told not to use it, and now we're saying they can, but use it ethically. Yeah, Tony?
Prof, just a comment. At UJ, it's such a peculiar environment because we have a very sensitive kind of understanding of our student cohort. So we have to always look at the fact that our students are very diverse and come from very different academic backgrounds.
Yes.
And then there is this dimension of using these new technologies. And so one thing that happened lately that was a bit jarring for some of the lecturers is that we were in the beginning of the year given the capacity to check for AI use using Turnitin. And this was really helpful for assignments, for long pieces of writing. But then around the mid-year break, I think this was reviewed, and then the Turnitin option to check for plagiarism, or rather check for AI use, was removed on the basis of that our students are being flagged for plagiarism because of language differences, or rather of academic kind of frameworks that are different, that make our students sound like robots when they write. I have a little bit of a contention against that, but I do see, as I said, the sensitivity aspect to it. But yeah, it's just something I thought was an interesting comment, that as much as we encourage students, we are also removing some of the safety nets that we have had in the past.
No, most definitely. Like you said, because they are taking what a chatbot is saying, right? And using what the AI tools are guiding them to use. Obviously, it's not their voice coming out. And we always speak about, in research, you have to let your voice be heard. It's your argument, your claim that you are stating, supported by what other authors. And then, like you said, it sounds more robotic in that you can see when you're reading the students' work, you can see the arguments that are coming across. It's very what word can I use? Um, you can see that they've used the tool. It's not their writing or their voice. It's too technical. Then it becomes too technical in nature. Um, so yes, I do agree. The Turnitin has removed that aspect. I've seen it. Um, I think now, because we have to embrace that these tools, accept that these tools are out there. I mean, we as researchers ourselves are using it. What's stopping students from using it? But again, use it ethically, show them how to use it so it doesn't come off as them sounding like a robot. So, yeah, these are things that you have to look at when it comes to research. Okay, and then the last one is lack of sensitivity on the part of academics with regard to reading load and the nature of the text prescribed, because we also, it's much like I would give you recommended reading and I would just say, go ahead and read this. And I just keep loading you with material, not realizing how much of reading you are loading onto the student. You were like, read this article, read this textbook, you just keep giving them information. It's like an information overload. Also, the sensitivity of, can the student handle all this reading? What's their reading capacity, the reading skills? Can we move on to 3.5? Thumbs up, thumbs down, and then we can break. All right, perfect. 3.5 is what reading strategies could be helpful to your postgraduate students. So we looked at your reading approaches, how you guide your students on how to read the information that is given to them, or the information that they are collecting from the various databases. When you begin reading to inform a new research project, what do you do? What do you take as an approach? And would you advise your students to do what you do? Why or why not? So when you are guiding them, do you only show them your style of reading, or what you think is an effective approach? Or do you teach them different styles and different reading strategies that's going to assist them? Like I said, we're sitting here right now in this lecture, we're learning about each other's different styles and techniques of either reading, writing, supervising, right? And it's not cast in stone that it's one specific method that you have to use, or one specific approach that you have to use. Like I mentioned earlier, you have to adjust and adapt to the learner's ability and skill to read or write. Badenhorst offers two contrasting approaches that postgraduate students could take. One is a slow and steady approach, beginning with recent key articles or books and then reading article by article, book by book, and then tracing key references from the reference list of each text. which is generally an approach that I would use. So taking them slow and steady through the entire process, starting article by article instead of them overloading themselves. So aside from us giving them articles to read, they also access their own article, right? And then generating more references. So once they read an article, and I also tell them go to the reference list of that particular article or book, and then you will see more related information for your research is in that reference list. And then obviously you'll look at those articles instead of just randomly selecting. You already have a starting point. Look at the reference list. They've referenced authors for their article, which you can also reference as well. The starting point. Then there's a blitz approach, allocating a specific amount of time to searching through databases, the internet, and also library resources, collecting and copying, skim reading, as we've just mentioned, and sorting into relevant piles to read more deeply. So this is where you are forming categories, collecting the information, putting it under different subheadings, different folders, and reading, using it later, sorting it out for more deeply their reading, right? So the blitz approach is where we say skimming through it, reading the abstract first maybe, or just going through the article really quickly using a blitz approach, and then collecting that article, putting it in a separate folder, and then, okay, fine, this is relevant to my study, and then we're going to read a bit more later. So there's two approaches, slow and steady, and then the skimming method, which is the blitz approach. The suggestions is fairly long. You're moving from macro to micro, managing from general orientation of reading to specific aspects of reading, comprehensive and responsiveness, responding to those readings. This is where now you are moving and you're narrowing your scope, where you collect a whole lot of information and then now you need to narrow it down into the actual information you are going to use from that specific text in your research. Moving from a big macro approach to a micro approach, narrowing it down. Everyone with me? Thumbs up, thumbs down. We're good? Okay, few more minutes. Guiding students' reading development. Focus is on undergraduate students. Much of what Pletson advises is relevant to postgraduate students, especially at honors level, and at other levels when they begin reading in a new area. She makes the following suggestions. Teaching and learning practices should, in the first place, aim at making visible to students the role that reading plays in their learning curriculum. Are we actually doing that, guiding their reading? Particular readings can be used to prompt students into distinguish between knowledge, which comes into play, and learning and reading processes. These knowledges and new knowledges emerging as a product of application and integration. So firstly, start the student off by giving them a particular reading and then navigate themselves to collecting their own reading or text through the various databases. And like she says, it's using the novice researcher at a postgraduate level, honors level, guiding the way that they going to read. And most of the time, you would give the student a specific text to read and tell them to dissect the information from there. Teaching and learning practices should aim at building students' knowledge of text structure and the discourse of different disciplines. Third area in which teaching and learning practices need to be developed would involve acknowledging the crucial role played by the affect in the reading process, especially effects generated when students' identities are sidelined by dominant viewpoints expressed in the text. This is where we say your voice needs to be heard first. So a lot of the time, the students write, they will always say according to, right? I always defer and take the student away from that style of writing, in that it's your voice first supported by that particular author. So it's not according to Smith 2024, and then you give your argument. You have to have your argument first concurred by Smith 2024. Your voice has to be heard, because it always says that it's a dominant viewpoint to say that this author is saying this, so this author is leading your study. No, you are leading your study, not the author or that particular reference. So we must be careful also in the way that we are writing. A lot of students learned that style. I'm not saying it's incorrect, because a lot of supervisors still use that style. But for me personally, I shy away from it, because it makes it easier when the student gets their voice across first, state their claim, make their argument, and then concur with what an author or authors have been saying. Finally, it needs to be recognized as students who speak English as an additional language have an important contribution to make when it comes to commenting on mainstream academic discourses. Their particular knowledge of languages and life worlds could provide a critical angle on reading resources. So if you are quite strong with English, it's going to be easier to build an argument, especially for an English medium school or university, because we're always reading and writing in English. It's the students that where English is not their first language, it's an additional language, then they're contributing, but the way in which they write and interpret stuff is going to be a bit more different. Okay, so it is 10:30 right now. I'm going to stop the recording. We can do a comfort break for about 15 minutes, and then we come back. So get your breakfast, get your coffees, and we'll meet back here at 10:45. Everyone good? Is that okay? I can stop the recording. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, and I'll see you at 10:45.